Hello everyone and welcome to excuse me this audio podcast. Welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast is part of the Pondering. This audio podcast is part of a Bostix and Blitzar and the specials. This audio podcast is part of the Conveyor Maverick, and this audio podcast is part of a ZtormLabostix production. Through this audio podcast, as part of this series, now looking into some aspects of the literature around the literature that to some of the literature in as part of this case study where our Goodwin looks to inform on a neurological condition in as part of a study where the case study in where in this patient case study, the patient case has had been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and so looking at some of the literature then. So Parkinson's is in amongst excuse me, and as part of the literature is evidenced as sort of irreversible and unfortunately is in part if not entirely is and can be progressive. It is or has been has a sort of a excuse me a multifactorial onset with several external and genetic risk factors. With several external and aspects of genetic risk factors. Prevalence of Parkinson's has doubled in the past 25 odd years, with more from those of the male backgrounds being affected than female, although there is varying sort of evidence in amongst scientific literature over the significance and the sort of pertinence of this particular in around the particular sort of demographics and sort of the statistical around the statistical basis. Neurological or neurodegeneration in around particular neurons referred to as the dopaminergic neurons at the basal ganglia are sort of the are referred to as are referred to as those neurons being central to the development in onset or in around the onset of Parkinsonism. Oxidative stress in amongst the literature is also evidenced and thought to be a sort of an important contributing basis to the loss of dopaminergic neurons as the metabolites of reactive oxygen species are toxic and can lead to misfolding of neural proteins, specifically a synuclein excuse me. At the same time, dopaminergic dysfunction sort of drives further or prompts further sort of degeneration of what's referred in literature as A9 neurons in the substantia and nigra parts compacta and locus locus coeruleus, particularly deteriorating sort of the axon or axon sort of terminals that span the striatum. And at the same time, in amongst the literature, despite Parkinson's being sort of an age related sort of basis, the weakening of the nigrostriatal pathway it's probable that it is probable where the pathway around the pathway where it begins or the sort of basis of is sort of begins sort of earlier with symptoms or symptomologies being displayed when the condition has significantly become progressive. That is to say that some of these early symptomologies, although there is evidence, for example, where symptomologies are probable for earlier appearance, it is only later when it's only later when around the symptomologies become more pertinent or significant as when the condition becomes more progressive. Antenatal anecdotal investigations report several comorbidities around Parkinson's, such as cerebral vascular sort of bases and oncological malignancies and bone fractures, for example. One notable comorbidity, and in the monster literature, there are other notable sort of comorbidities in Parkinson's around patients with Parkinson's or Parkinsonism, and in on this patient case, it is where again some of those symptomologies where they may present earlier, but then are more probable later in sort of later life. So that draws this audio podcast to a close. This audio podcast is part of the Pondering. This audio podcast is part of the Bostix and Blitzar and the specials. This audio podcast is part of the Conveyor Maverick. And this audio podcast as part of a ZtormLabostix production.